The first pulsar you will hear is called the Vela pulsar, a residue of the explosion of a supernova that primitive man probably saw in broad daylight some 12,000 years ago. The second pulsar is known as 0329 plus 54. The figure indicates its position in the sky. The supernova that generated it exploded 5 million years ago, and its radio pulsations take 7,500 years to reach the Earth. Vast lighthouses of the sky, the two pulsars will be guiding our musical voyage. Listen closely to the ticking of these cosmic clocks. We have a rendezvous with the keepers of eternal time.
Le Noir de l'Étoile, the Black of the Star, is one of the most unique experiences to listen to as an audience member and to perform as well.
Yellow Barn is a chamber music center in Putney, Vermont. It was founded in 1969 by a man who was a stargazer of the First Order, David Wells.
Yellow Barn did this piece over the course of a year, first shaping the idea at our summer home, Greenwood School, and then moving the piece to be done out of doors under the stars that inspired the composition of Le Noir de l'Étoile in Marfa, Texas, with an intervening performance at the Nasher Sculpture Center in Dallas.
Performing this piece is a very special experience for a percussionist. There aren't a lot of percussion pieces like it. It's for 6 percussionists arranged in a circle around an audience, and each player has a massive setup of instruments. Everyone has like the same groups of instruments, so everyone has a few drums, but the exact drums and the sizes of the drums that everyone has are different. One person's setup was really concentrated on very small little tom-toms, and that goes all the way down the line until some people's setups have huge instruments.
When we did this at the Greenwood School, initially we actually had an astronomer. Tom Jabal came from Hawaii from his post at the Gemini Observatory, and it was absolutely fantastic to see the audience crammed into the Greenwood School gymnasium, surrounded by these drummers, surrounded by sound, with an artistic creation of the Greenwood students overhead. They had done a recreation of a pulsar that hung from one corner of the Greenwood gym to the other.
At 2 points in this piece, the composer puts in a recording of a pulsar. After we listen to that recording, the percussionist will be playing material that is the sounds of the pulsar on live percussion instruments. So you see why he chose the instruments that he chose, you see why he chooses the rhythms that he chooses. There's one section that I remember specifically where the pulsar is playing very fast, like 30-second notes or something like that, and then immediately after, a percussionist comes in playing at the same rhythm. The piece itself, the way it's constructed, is incredible. It's brilliant. You're in this circle, and he'll often write patterns on similar instruments, these sort of layered swells that go up in dynamic and then down in dynamic, and he passes it around the circle very rapidly. So you see these accents just sort of zooming from player to player, and if you're sitting in the middle of it, it's like this cacophony of sounds. It's almost like you can follow a thing as it travels around the circle.
There's a click track that the percussionists use to listen in and keep track because they're practically a football field's distance from one another at its farthest point.
So you're listening to this crazy click track which has a guy in French saying the rehearsal numbers when you get to them to make sure you don't get lost, and then there are all these complicated clicks going on. But then when we actually got out to Marfa, the weather wasn't quite cooperating with us. There was a lot of wind. When there's a lot of wind out in the desert, that interferes with the radio signals of the wireless click track. So during this performance, you would have, you'd have a stretch of 15 seconds where your click would just go out. And you'd just be on your own doing your thing, and then the guy in French would come in and tell you what new rehearsal number you're on. We did a few performances at the National Sculpture Center in Dallas. And then we went out to Marfa to play an outdoor performance. The thing that drew all of the players into the project was the prospect of performing this piece that's all about constellations and stars under a clear sky in the middle of the desert in Texas.
The town of Marfa is very much like the town of Putney. It's about the same population. And when we arrived there, they embraced us in the same way that Putney embraces us.
We found a spot, a plateau that gave us some height, a little more closeness to the stars. Our truck brought all this percussion equipment.
And we arrived, and they were all wearing T-shirts that had the name of the piece that we had delivered to the town, sort of airdropped in advance of our getting there. There were school children who all had their T-shirts on when we arrived to work with them in schools.
We set up these huge wooden platforms that we put all the percussion instruments on, and it was beautiful.
We had electrical cords coming from a club next door in the middle of the desert. We had chairs coming from 3 different churches in the area. We had one brewery that donated a keg for our post-concert party. And we had the local high school, Marfa High School, and the principal drove school buses to bring townspeople up from the town up to this ranch land that we were performing on.
We had made connections with local bookstores and given lectures. We had made connections with people that lent us material needs.
There we were, coming from our little studios, and then we were playing in the biggest room one can imagine, under the stars.
We were so worried all day, or in the days leading up to it, that it might rain. We thought that was like the only thing that could get in the way of our performance.
We had been assured that this was a very remote possibility by an astronomer that worked in a nearby telescope. And indeed, he was right, there was no rain. What there was, as soon as the sun went down, was a phenomenal wind.
The wind just started picking up in the afternoon, and it got stronger and stronger.
It felt like hurricane force winds because, we're dealing also with percussion equipment that's easily dislodged. So we had townspeople holding up percussion instruments. We had people holding music in place. The actual performance was fraught with adventure.
There's a huge gong that's on a metal stand. It's weighed in the right way so that it's not going to fall over, but if the wind blows it, it could sort of tip the balance and it would fall off the platform. So 2 minutes before we start, right before we start, we're all running around our setups with rolls of duct tape. We must have used 5 or 6 rolls of duct tape, literally taping everything down as much as we could. Everyone had a couple handlers right next to their setup, and their job was to make sure that nothing big fell off. We were just worried that you would hit an instrument and then you'd go back to it a few minutes later and it wouldn't be there because it had fallen off the platform.
I was in the middle by a percussion instrument that's rarely used. It's called a rotosound, and at the very end of this piece, one of the percussionists comes up and strikes the rotosound and it spins. And very slowly, over a period of a few minutes, slows down and the sound then stops. But the wind was blowing so hard, there was no chance that the rotosound would stop spinning, and the piece could have gone until dawn, at least until the wind had died down. I would say that we wouldn't have gotten through the performance had not been for the incredible sense of community that different people, different segments of the population of Marfa brought to the production of the Grisey.
It was really still an unforgettable experience. It really felt like we were fighting against nature to perform this piece, but it felt like this really wonderful community because the audience, they were into it. Most of them were helping us make sure we could get through the performance. They were really excited about it. We were committed to making this happen. Seth and Catherine, everyone from Yellow Barn were really committed to making this happen. And it was still unbelievable. It was definitely worth it, and I would do it again in a second. But it was the most difficult performance I've probably ever given for reasons that you don't usually think of when you talk about a performance being difficult.